Hello again and welcome to World Talks with me, Anna Kalczyńska. Are the Balkan nations rising? Certainly what we've observed in Serbia for the last months qualifies for a peaceful uprising. Unlike traditional opposition movements, it has no single figurehead to discredit, only a swelling tide of discontent that refuses to be silenced. In Hungary, the opposition is also on the rise and gaining momentum with a large protest in place for the Tisza party and its leader, Péter Magyar. So what could be the future of these movements? And is there a common denominator? Let's get some insight from a specialist, Spasimir Domaradzki, the political scientist from University of Warsaw and Institute of Central Europe. Good evening, and thank you for your time, sir. So, we're looking for a common ground here for those protests, and are there any similarities? Are there both nations close to each other, the Serbian and the Hungarian? I mean, is there a common quest for values, democratic values like freedom?
Indeed, if you take a look at the political process over the last almost 15 years, you will get a sense of a certain similarity within the two countries. On one hand, you have in Hungary Viktor Orban's complete grasp on power, to the extent that we call today Hungary one of the textbook examples of state capture. On the other hand, in Serbia, not much different process in which Aleksandar Vučić took over power, to the extent that currently there is a general feeling that the sense of democracy is no longer a tool that really can introduce any changes. And in that sense, it also fits to this concept of state capture, where the public institutions, the division of power, the balance of power is simply a mockery, or it doesn't exist. And in practical terms, all the possible tools of the state apparatus are controlled from one source of power.
All right, so the support for Aleksandar Vučić is said to have collapsed. 58% of Serbs support the students' protests. So now, following those large demonstrations, Vučić acknowledged that he has heard the message and called those in power to change. So what's next for this movement of youth? It doesn't even have a name, as long as I know. So is there a time framework that could help us understand what could possibly happen next?
Well, we have to be extremely careful when we reflect on the arguments and comments of President Vučić, because he has reached such a level of skills of manipulating the public opinion and producing statements that are internally contradictory and at the same time aim at two things. One is to prolong his endurance, and on the other hand, to send signals that aim to appease the public opinion. As we have already discussed previously, the political protests in Serbia, and in particular the students' protests, are an absolutely fascinating and new example of public disobedience against the political system that has removed any other mechanisms that allow this political regime to bring change. And in that sense, it is a very legitimate question, what comes next. The point is that you have mentioned already that there are no sound political leaders behind the students' protest, but we also need to have in mind that we have a very divided and practically very weak political opposition, which actually students try to ignore and to stay at a hand distance, because they are afraid that being connected with the politicians will actually lead to capturing of the protests by the political elites and will actually dismantle the whole effort. And if we look at the students' demands, it becomes quite clear what is at stake. At stake is not any deep ideological rivalry or geopolitical sympathies. At stake is simply the return or the reestablishment of the efficient functioning of the state. The accountability, the responsibility, the elimination of nepotism, and most importantly, the question of efficient fight against corruption. And what we observe today, it's like a spillover of frustration that goes all the way from Belgrade through Kočani and North Macedonia. Today, we observed similar attitudes between 2021 and 2024 in Bulgaria, which actually were quite successfully suppressed by Borisov's regime. And in that sense, we have a sense of frustration. We also need to add here Montenegro. And in that sense, this sense of frustration is growing because people are missing the normal functioning of the state, not the big ideological or geopolitical pictures.
It seems to me that we all identify the problem quite well. The problem is that this frustration sees no issue apart from people on the streets, but nothing next happens. And there seems to me that there's nobody who could possibly have one single idea who to put forward as a leader who could face Alexander Vučić, for that matter. So let us go to Hungary now, because as you rightly pointed out, both nations, the Serbian and Hungarians, are as captured states. So the parliamentary elections are due next year in Hungary. Experts say domestically Orban may be somehow losing support, but internationally he's still strongly backed by his allies. And as we know, in this twine between Mar-a-Lago and Moscow. So do you think this stretch could be paying off?
Well, let's put it that way. The first dimension that we discussed is just one aspect of the political challenges in the region. The second dimension, no less important, is what you have mentioned, and in practical terms, this global ideological rivalry within the Western world, which can be roughly brought down to two camps. The first one is this, what we could call sovereignist or localist camp against the globalist and the so-called liberal international elites. Orban emphasizes and wants to play as an aid within this localist and sovereignist camp, believing that this can further endure his rule, especially that he has no more aides in the European Union. And in that sense, he needs a political backup and a sense of reason for his position. We need to remember that Budapest has turned into a kind of a safe haven for local autocrats, starting from the former North Macedonian Prime Minister to the current Polish representatives of this team that also managed to find a safe haven in Budapest. We get the sense that this division, this ideological division within the Western world is becoming more and more acute, and in that sense, Orban is betting on Trump and on Putin, because quite paradoxically, within this conservative sovereignist camp, there is a sense of unity among around moral values of conservative nature that are actually turning against the globalism and liberal values of the European political elites.
So let's go now to Romania. As we know, there's also political turmoil there in the midst of presidential elections. So according to Atlas Intel poll, first round of Romania's presidential election will be won by a right-wing party candidate with 5 contenders right now without Călin Georgescu. Everybody seems to wonder, how about his electorate? Who are they going to vote for? Do you think that they are going to back Elena Lasconi in the second round, for instance, the person who was the first to protest the annulment of the elections?
Well, Romania is the third dimension of this very dynamic political situation in our region, because here the clash is around a different challenge, the challenge which we sense in the region. It is the challenge of Russian propaganda and influence, external influence that aims to determine the political process within the countries. And we should not lie to ourselves. We will not be immune in Poland to such activities, whether they're going to come from Moscow or from the US. There will be an attempt to shape the political process also in our country. But when it comes to Romania, we have an example of what is called in the literature of an attempt to introduce militant democracy. In other words, the democratic institutions to have the capacity to exclude from the political life those politicians who can actually, in a sense, follow Hitler's path in coming to power by using democratic mechanisms and then stripping democracy of its elements and turning the countries into autocratic regimes. However, and here comes a very important question, who, when, and how has the right to assess who constitutes a threat? And if we look carefully at the claims that Vice President Vance made, they actually try to emphasize that we should not be afraid of the nature of democracy in itself, which also brings with itself change, which is not liked by the incumbent political elites. However, the Romanian case is exactly an example how you have the state institutions capable of excluding certain political actors. But that does not replace the fact, as you have mentioned, that the society is largely tired with the current political situation and searches for a new leader. What is a question that appears today when we know that Călin Georgescu is not going to participate is whether the leader of AUR, who is a person with much less popular support, will be capable to take over this political capital and be able to score high in the elections. On the other hand, we see also among the ruling political elites a reflection that this move is doubtful, and it is not obvious that this is the right thing to do in a democratic country.
Spasimir Domaradzki, thank you so much for being with us this evening. And so we hope to answer the question about the political rise and the spring of nations in the Balkans, at least to some extent. Thank you so much again. And thank you for being with us here on World Talks. Please stay tuned to TVP World.